Maria Gonzalez walked through the busy halls of Denver International Airport. Her black rolling suitcase moved smoothly behind her as she checked her phone for the gate number. Flight 4147 to Phoenix would leave in 45 minutes. She had plenty of time. The airport was crowded that Tuesday morning. Business people rushed past her with coffee cups and laptops. Families dragged tired children and oversized bags. The sounds of rolling luggage and airport announcements filled the air around her. Maria looked like any other traveler. She wore a simple navy blue blazer, dark jeans, and comfortable walking shoes. Her long black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. At 42 years old, she had learned to dress in a way that helped her blend in. Most people would never guess what she really did for work. In her purse, Maria carried 2 passports. One was her American passport, dark blue with gold letters. The other was her Mexican passport, green with the Mexican eagle on the front. Both were completely legal. Both belonged to her. Maria had been born in Guadalajara, Mexico. When she was 8 years old, her family moved to El Paso, Texas. Her father got a job fixing airplanes at the airport there. Maria grew up watching planes take off and land. She loved everything about flying. After high school, Maria studied engineering at the University of Texas. She worked hard and got top grades. When she graduated, the Federal Aviation Administration offered her a job. That was 20 years ago. Now she was one of the most important safety inspectors in the country. As the FAA Chief Inspector for the Southwest region, Maria had a big job. She made sure that airlines followed all the safety rules. She checked that pilots were trained properly. She inspected planes to make sure they were safe to fly. If she found problems, she had the power to ground entire fleets of aircraft. But today, Maria was not wearing her government badge. She was not in her official uniform. She was traveling quietly, the way she often did when she was doing surprise inspections. Airlines and airports could not prepare for her visits if they did not know she was coming. Maria had spent the last 3 days in Colorado. She had visited 2 aircraft maintenance facilities without telling them who she was. She posed as a regular inspector doing routine checks. What she found worried her. At the first facility, she discovered that mechanics were not following proper procedures for checking wing bolts. At the second place, she found that some workers did not have the right training certificates. These were serious safety problems that could cause crashes. Maria had written detailed reports about both facilities. The reports were in her laptop bag. Tomorrow, she would send them to her team in Phoenix. The facilities would have to fix the problems immediately or face heavy fines. This kind of undercover work was normal for Maria. She traveled all over the Southwest region doing surprise inspections. She had been to airports in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and California. She had shut down unsafe operations in Las Vegas. She had grounded planes in Houston. She had fired lazy inspectors in San Antonio. Other government workers knew who Maria was. Airline executives feared her phone calls. Pilots respected her knowledge. But regular airport workers and gate agents usually had no idea they were talking to one of the most powerful people in aviation safety. Maria preferred it that way. When people did not know her job, she could see how they really treated passengers. She could watch how security guards behaved. She could observe whether gate agents followed proper procedures. As Maria walked toward her gate, she thought about her choice to use her Mexican passport. She was proud of both her countries. She was grateful to America for giving her family opportunities. But she also loved Mexico and wanted to honor her heritage. Some of her colleagues did not understand this choice. They told her it was easier to just use the American passport. They said it would prevent problems and questions. But Maria believed that legal documents should be respected no matter what country issued them. Gate 23 was at the end of a long hallway. Maria could see the waiting area filled with passengers. Some people were reading books. Others were looking at their phones. A few were eating breakfast from paper bags. Behind the gate counter, a young man in a blue airline uniform was typing on a computer. His name tag said Derek Thompson. He looked stressed and unhappy. Maria noticed that he kept checking his watch and shaking his head. Derek was having a bad morning. The flight was delayed because of weather in Phoenix. Passengers kept asking him questions he could not answer. His supervisor had already yelled at him twice about yesterday's customer complaints. Derek had worked as a gate agent for 3 years. He made $15 an hour checking tickets and making announcements. The job was harder than people thought. Passengers got angry when flights were late. They blamed him for problems he could not control. Today felt especially difficult for Derek. He had stayed up too late watching television. He had spilled coffee on his uniform shirt. His girlfriend had sent him a text message saying they needed to talk. Derek was in a bad mood and looking for someone to blame. Maria found an empty seat near the gate and sat down. She pulled out her phone to check her emails. Her team in Phoenix had sent her updates about other inspections happening that week. Everything seemed normal. The boarding announcement would come soon. Maria looked at her ticket. She had seat 12A, a window seat. She liked to look out the window during takeoff and landing. After 20 years of working with airplanes, she still loved to fly. Maria did not know that her peaceful morning was about to change. She did not know that Derek Thompson was watching passengers with suspicious eyes. She did not know that her choice to carry a Mexican passport would soon create a situation that would change both of their lives forever. As Maria sat quietly reading her emails, Derek stood behind the counter looking at the line of passengers. He was about to make a decision that would cost him his job and teach everyone at the airport an important lesson about treating people with respect. The boarding announcement came at exactly 9:15 a.m. Derek Thompson's voice crackled through the gate area speakers. He sounded tired and annoyed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin boarding Flight 447 to Phoenix. First-class passengers and those needing special assistance may board now." Maria Gonzalez stayed in her seat. She had a regular coach ticket, so she would wait for her group to be called. She watched as a few passengers walked up to Derek's counter with their boarding passes. Derek checked each ticket with quick mechanical movements. He barely looked at the passengers' faces. Scan the barcode, hand back the ticket, point toward the plane. Scan, hand back, point. His movements showed how bored and frustrated he felt. Group A passengers may now board, Derek announced 15 minutes later. Maria looked at her boarding pass. She was in Group B, so she had a few more minutes to wait. She put her phone back in her purse and organized her carry-on bag. Inside the bag were her laptop, some work files, and her 2 passports. Maria always kept both passports together in a small leather folder. Today, her Mexican passport was on top because she had used it to check in online the night before. The airline's computer system had accepted it without any problems. TSA security had looked at it and waved her through. Everything had been normal. "Group B passengers may now board," Derek called out. Maria stood up and walked toward the gate counter. About 20 other passengers formed a loose line behind her. She pulled out her boarding pass and her Mexican passport. The green cover of the passport caught the bright airport lights. Derek was looking down at his computer screen when Maria approached. She placed her boarding pass on the counter and held out her passport. Derek reached for the documents without looking up. Then he saw the green passport cover. Derek's hand stopped in midair. He looked at the passport, then at Maria, then back at the passport. His expression changed from bored indifference to sharp suspicion. "What's this?" Derek asked, holding up the Mexican passport like it was something dirty. "That's my passport," Maria said calmly, "and here's my boarding pass." Derek opened the passport and stared at Maria's photo. He looked back and forth between the picture and Maria's face several times. His eyes narrowed with distrust. "This is a domestic flight," Derek said loudly. "You don't need a passport for domestic flights." "I know," Maria replied, "but a passport is valid identification for any flight. Your airline accepts it." Derek's voice got louder. "Why are you using a Mexican passport? Are you even supposed to be in this country?" The passengers behind Maria began to notice the conversation. Some of them stepped closer to hear what was happening. Maria felt their eyes on her back. "I'm a U.S. citizen," Maria explained patiently. "I have the right to use either of my passports as identification." "Both of your passports?" Derek's voice was full of disbelief. "Let me see your American passport then." Maria felt her anger rising, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't have to show you my American passport. This Mexican passport is perfectly legal identification." Derek slammed the passport down on the counter. The sound made several passengers jump. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're trying to play here, but you can't just show up with foreign documents and expect to board an American airplane." "Sir," Maria said, her voice still calm but with a warning edge, "you are being discriminatory. My passport is valid and I have a legal right to use it." "Discriminatory?" Derek laughed harshly. "I'm just doing my job. I'm supposed to check identification and I don't trust this." He waved the passport in the air. The line of passengers behind Maria was getting longer. People were starting to complain about the delay. Some were checking their watches and looking frustrated. "Is there a problem here?" asked an elderly man in the line. "Yeah, there's a problem," Derek said loudly. "This woman is trying to board with suspicious documents." Maria felt her face get hot with embarrassment and anger, but she had been in difficult situations before. As an FAA inspector, she had dealt with hostile airline employees and uncooperative mechanics. She knew how to stay professional under pressure. "There is nothing suspicious about my documents," Maria said firmly. "I am a federal employee traveling on business. I have a valid passport and a valid boarding pass. I am asking you to do your job properly." Derek's face turned red. "Don't tell me how to do my job. I've been working here for 3 years. I know suspicious when I see it." "What exactly do you find suspicious?" Maria asked. "Everything," Derek shouted. "You look Mexican, you have a Mexican passport, and you're being difficult about showing proper identification." The gate area fell silent. Passengers stared at Derek in shock. Even the elderly man who had complained about the delay looked uncomfortable. Maria felt a cold anger settle in her stomach. She had experienced discrimination before, but never so openly and aggressively. She thought about all the times she had been questioned about her accent, her name, or her appearance. But this was different. This was an airline employee, in public, making assumptions about her based on her race and her choice of passport. "Sir," Maria said, her voice now ice cold, "you are engaging in racial profiling. You are discriminating against me because of my ethnicity and my choice to use a legal form of identification." "I am not being racist," Derek yelled. "I'm being careful. People like you always try to cause problems." "People like me?" Maria repeated. Derek realized he had said something he should not have said, but instead of apologizing, he doubled down. "Yeah, people who try to sneak onto planes with questionable documents, people who don't belong here." The passengers in line began to murmur among themselves. Some looked disgusted with Derek's behavior. Others seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. A few were recording the confrontation with their phones. Maria made a decision. She was not going to let this go. Derek was not just being rude to her personally. He was violating federal anti-discrimination laws. He was treating a passenger badly based on race and nationality. And worst of all, he was doing it while representing an airline that was supposed to serve all customers equally. "I want to speak to your supervisor," Maria said clearly. "My supervisor is busy," Derek replied. "And I'm not letting you on this plane until you show me proper identification." "This is proper identification. Not good enough." "Then call security," Maria said. "Call your supervisor. Call whoever you need to call. But I am not moving from this spot until someone in authority explains to me why my legal passport is not being accepted." Derek's face was now bright red. Sweat was forming on his forehead. He had painted himself into a corner with his aggressive behavior, and he did not know how to get out of it. "Fine," Derek yelled. "I'll call security. They can deal with you." He picked up his phone and dialed airport security. While he waited for them to answer, he glared at Maria with pure hatred. Maria stood perfectly still. She knew that everything Derek had said and done was being recorded by passenger phones. She knew that his behavior was completely unacceptable, and she knew that he had no idea who he was really dealing with. The phone call to security would change everything. Derek Thompson spoke into his phone with fake authority. "Security, this is Derek at gate 23. I need someone up here right away. I have a passenger with suspicious documents trying to board flight 447. Maria watched Derek's performance with growing anger. She could hear every word he said. Behind her, the line of passengers was getting restless. Some people were checking their phones to see if they could catch different flights. No, she won't show proper identification. Derek continued talking to security. She's being aggressive and difficult. She has some kind of foreign passport, and she's refusing to cooperate. I am not being aggressive, Maria said loudly enough for other passengers to hear. I am standing here calmly with my valid passport and boarding pass. Derek covered the phone with his hand. You need to step aside and let other passengers board. I will not step aside until this is resolved properly, Maria replied. An older woman in line spoke up. Excuse me, but I saw the whole thing. This lady has been very polite. You're the one who's been yelling. Derek ignored the woman and returned to his phone call. Yeah, she's causing a scene now, getting other passengers involved. You better send someone quick. Maria felt grateful for the woman's support, but she also felt embarrassed that other travelers were being dragged into this situation. She had wanted to board her flight quietly and get home to Phoenix. Instead, she was stuck in a public confrontation with a discriminatory gate agent. 5 minutes later, 2 airport security officers arrived at Gate 23. Both men wore dark blue uniforms with patches that said Airport Security. They looked serious and professional. The first officer was tall and thin with gray hair. His name tag said Officer Martinez. The second officer was younger and heavier, with short black hair. His name tag said Officer Johnson. Derek immediately walked over to the security officers. He spoke to them in a low voice, but Maria could still hear most of what he said. This woman is trying to board with questionable documents, Derek explained. She has a Mexican passport for a domestic flight. When I asked for proper ID, she became hostile and started accusing me of racism. Officer Martinez looked over at Maria. She was standing calmly by the gate counter, holding her boarding pass and passport. She did not look hostile or dangerous. Has she threatened anyone? Officer Martinez asked. Well, no, Derek admitted. But she's being very difficult. She won't show an American ID. Officer Johnson walked over to Maria. Ma'am, can I see your identification, please? Maria handed him her Mexican passport and boarding pass. Officer Johnson opened the passport and examined it carefully. He looked at the photo, checked the expiration date, and flipped through the pages. This appears to be a valid passport, Officer Johnson said. But it's Mexican, Derek protested. She should have an American ID for a domestic flight. Officer Martinez joined his partner. Sir, a valid passport from any country is acceptable. Identification for domestic flights. The TSA accepts it and so do the airlines. Derek's face showed confusion and panic. But she looked suspicious, and she was being difficult when I asked questions. What kind of questions did you ask? Officer Martinez wanted to know. Derek hesitated. He was beginning to realize that he might have made a mistake. I asked why she was using a Mexican passport. I asked if she was supposed to be in the country. Officer Johnson frowned. Those are not appropriate questions for a gate agent to ask a passenger with valid documents. Maria decided to speak up. Officers, I am a United States citizen traveling on business. I chose to use my Mexican passport because it is legal identification that I have every right to use. This gate agent has been discriminating against me based on my ethnicity and my choice of passport. She's lying, Derek shouted. She's trying to cause trouble. Officer Martinez held up his hand to quiet Derek. Sir, please lower your voice. We'll handle this. The security officers asked Maria to step aside so they could speak with her privately. They walked a few feet away from the gate counter, but they stayed where other passengers could see them. Ma'am, we need to verify your identity through our system, Officer Johnson explained. It's just routine when there's been a complaint. Maria understood that the officers were trying to be professional. They had received a complaint from an airline employee, so they had to investigate. But she also knew that Derek's complaint was based on discrimination, not legitimate security concerns. I understand, Maria said. But I want you to know that I have been completely cooperative. I have valid documents, and I have done nothing wrong. This gate agent has treated me badly because of my race and my choice to use a Mexican passport. Officer, Martinez nodded. We'll look into everything. Can you wait here while we run your information through our database? Maria agreed to wait. She watched as Officer Johnson took her passport to a computer terminal and began typing. Other passengers continued to stare at the situation. Some looked sympathetic to Maria. Others seemed impatient about the flight delay. Derek stood behind, his counter looking nervous. He kept glancing at the security officers and then at Maria. For the first time since the confrontation began, he seemed uncertain about his actions. While Officer Johnson worked at the computer, Officer Martinez spoke with some of the passengers who had witnessed the confrontation. The elderly woman who had defended Maria told the officer exactly what she had seen and heard. That gate agent was completely out of line, the woman said. He was rude and accusatory from the moment he saw her passport. She never raised her voice or acted aggressively. A businessman who had been recording with his phone offered to show the video to Officer Martinez. "I got most of it on video," he said. "You can see exactly what happened." Derek watched these conversations with growing alarm. He was starting to realize that the other passengers were not supporting his version of events. Instead, they were telling the security officers that he had been the one behaving badly. Officer Johnson spent several minutes at the computer terminal. He was running Maria's passport information through multiple databases. He checked her against terrorist watch lists, criminal records, and immigration status. While she waited, Maria thought about revealing her true identity. As an FAA chief inspector, she carried a federal badge that would immediately resolve this situation. But she decided to let things play out. She wanted to see how far Derek's discrimination would go. She wanted to understand how airport security would handle a passenger complaint about racial profiling. Maria also realized that this situation could become an important case study. She dealt with discrimination issues in the aviation industry all the time. Airlines and airports often claimed they treated all passengers equally, but here was a clear example of an employee discriminating against a passenger based on race and nationality. After 10 minutes, Officer Johnson returned from the computer terminal. He handed Maria's passport back to her with a serious expression. "Ma'am, your documents are completely valid," he said. "There are no issues with your identity or your right to travel." Derek's mouth fell open. "But are you sure? Did you check everything?" "We checked everything," Officer Martinez confirmed. "This passenger has done nothing wrong." Derek looked desperate. "Well, what about her attitude? She was being difficult and uncooperative." Officer Johnson looked at Derek with obvious disapproval. "From what I can see, sir, this passenger has been completely cooperative. She provided valid identification when requested. She answered questions politely. She has not threatened anyone or caused any real disturbance." "But," Derek started to protest. "However," Officer Martinez interrupted, "we have serious concerns about your conduct in this situation." Derek's face went pale. For the first time, he seemed to realize that he might be in trouble instead of Maria. Officer Martinez crossed his arms and looked directly at Derek Thompson. "Sir, we need to discuss your behavior during this incident." Derek's confident attitude was completely gone. He shifted nervously behind the gate counter, sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool airport air conditioning. "I don't understand," Derek said weakly. "I was just doing my job. I was being careful about security." "Being careful about security does not include racial profiling," Officer Johnson said firmly. "Multiple passengers have told us that you questioned this woman's right to be in the country based on her appearance and her choice of passport." Derek looked around the gate area. Most of the passengers were still watching the situation. Some were nodding in agreement with the security officer's words. Derek realized that his behavior had been witnessed by dozens of people. "I wasn't being racist," Derek protested. "I just thought her documents looked suspicious." Officer Martinez held up Maria's Mexican passport. What exactly looked suspicious about this valid passport? Derek opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. He could not explain what was suspicious about a legitimate government document without admitting that his suspicions were based on prejudice. While the security officers questioned Derek, Maria stood quietly nearby. She was documenting everything in her mind. As an FAA inspector, she was trained to observe and remember details that might be important later. Maria noticed that Derek's supervisor had not appeared during this entire incident. She wondered if the gate agent had even contacted his manager. She also noticed that no airline representatives had come to apologize for Derek's behavior or to offer assistance. Flight 447 was now significantly delayed. The other passengers were getting frustrated, but most of them seemed to understand that Derek had caused the problem, not Maria. Several people had approached her to express their support. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," whispered a young mother holding a baby. That man was completely out of line. Officer Johnson walked over to Maria. "Ma'am, we're going to need to complete our investigation, but it appears that you are the victim of discrimination in this incident." "Thank you for recognizing that," Maria replied. "I want to file a formal complaint against the gate agent and possibly against the airline." Derek overheard this and panicked. "A complaint? She can't file a complaint. I was just doing my job. You were discriminating against a passenger," Officer Martinez said coldly. "That's not part of your job. That's illegal." Officer Johnson pulled out a small notebook. "Ma'am, can you give me a detailed account of what happened from your perspective?" Maria recounted the entire incident clearly and calmly. She explained how Derek had become hostile the moment he saw her Mexican passport. She described his inappropriate questions about her right to be in the country. She quoted his exact words when he said, "People like you always cause problems." As Maria spoke, Derek's face grew more and more pale. He was hearing his own words repeated back to him, and they sounded even worse than he remembered. "I never said that," Derek protested weakly. The businessman with the phone stepped forward. "Actually, you did say that. I have it on video." Derek's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew he was in serious trouble. Officer Martinez turned to Derek. "Sir, we're going to need your full name, employee ID number, and supervisor's contact information." "Why?" "Do you need that?" Derek asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because this incident will be reported to your employer, to airport management, and to federal authorities who handle discrimination complaints." Derek felt sick to his stomach. He thought about his job, his bills, his rent payment that was due next week. He thought about having to explain to his girlfriend why he got fired. He thought about trying to find another job with a discrimination complaint on his record. "Look," Derek said desperately, "maybe we can work something out. Maybe I made a mistake. I was having a bad day and I'm sorry if I said something wrong." Maria looked at Derek with no sympathy. This wasn't just saying something wrong. This was systematic discrimination based on my race and nationality. This was treating me like a criminal because of my appearance and my choice of legal identification. Officer Johnson continued taking notes. "Ma'am, do you work for the federal government?" "Yes, I do," Maria answered. "What department?" "Officer," Martinez asked. Maria paused for a moment. She had not planned to reveal her identity yet, but the security officers needed the information for their report. "I work for the Federal Aviation Administration," Maria said. Derek's eyes widened. The FAA regulated airlines. They had the power to fine companies and shut down operations. Derek realized that he had discriminated against someone who worked for one of the most powerful agencies in aviation. "What's your position with the FAA?" Officer Johnson asked. Again, Maria hesitated. She looked at Derek, who was staring at her with growing fear. She looked at the passengers who were still listening to every word. She made a decision. "I'm an inspector," Maria said simply. It was not a lie, but it was not the whole truth either. Maria decided to save the full revelation for later. She wanted to see how the situation developed without the influence of her high-ranking position. Derek slumped against the gate counter. An FAA inspector. He had discriminated against an FAA inspector. His career in aviation was probably over. "Officer," Martinez spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, this is Martinez at Gate 23. I need a supervisor down here for a discrimination incident. We're going to need to take statements and file reports." Within minutes, a senior security supervisor arrived at the gate. She was a middle-aged African-American woman wearing a uniform with sergeant stripes. Her name tag said Sergeant Williams. Sergeant Williams quickly assessed the situation. She spoke briefly with Officers Martinez and Johnson, then approached Maria. Ma'am, I understand you've been the victim of discrimination by this airline employee. I want to personally apologize on behalf of airport security for what you've experienced. Thank you, Maria said. I appreciate your professionalism in handling this situation. Sergeant Williams looked over at Derek, who was now sitting in a chair looking defeated. Sir, you need to contact your supervisor immediately. This incident will be reported to your airline's management and to federal authorities. Derek pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He had to call his supervisor and explain what had happened. He had to admit that he had discriminated against a passenger and caused a major incident at the gate. While Derek made his phone call, Sergeant Williams continued gathering information from witnesses. The businessman showed her his video recording. Other passengers gave their statements about what they had seen and heard. Maria watched all of this activity with professional interest. She was seeing how airport security handled a discrimination complaint. She was observing the procedures and protocols that were supposed to protect passengers from prejudicial treatment. Overall, she was impressed with the security officers' response. They had investigated thoroughly, gathered evidence from multiple sources, and treated her complaint seriously. But she was concerned that no airline representatives had appeared to address the situation. Derek finished his phone call and walked back to the gate counter. His face was ashen. My supervisor is on his way, he said quietly. Sergeant Williams nodded. Good. We'll need to speak with him about your employment status and about the airline's policies regarding passenger treatment. Derek realized that his supervisor was not coming to help him. His supervisor was coming to start the process of firing him. Sergeant Williams walked over to the computer terminal where Officer Johnson had been working. She needed to run a more detailed background check on Maria Gonzalez for the official incident report. I'm going to need to verify your employment information for our records, Sergeant Williams explained to Maria. It's standard procedure when federal employees are involved in incidents. Maria nodded. Of course, whatever you need. Sergeant Williams typed Maria's name into the federal employee database. The system required her to enter specific search parameters, so she started with the basic information from Maria's passport. As the search results appeared on the screen, Sergeant Williams's expression changed. Her eyes widened as she read the information. She looked at the computer screen, then at Maria, then back at the screen. Ma'am, Sergeant Williams said quietly. Can you step over here for a moment? Maria walked to the computer terminal. Sergeant Williams turned the screen so only Maria could see it. Is this information correct? Sergeant Williams asked, pointing to the screen. Maria looked at her federal employment record displayed on the monitor. Her official title was clearly visible. Chief Inspector, Federal Aviation Administration, Southwest Region. Yes, that's correct, Maria said calmly. Sergeant Williams' face went pale. She had been in airport security for 15 years. She knew exactly what an FAA chief inspector was. She knew the power that Maria held. She knew that Maria could shut down the entire airport if she found serious safety violations. Oh my God, Sergeant Williams whispered. Derek has no idea who he just discriminated against. Maria put her finger to her lips. Please keep this quiet for now. I want to see how this situation develops naturally. Sergeant Williams nodded, but her hands were shaking slightly as she printed out Maria's employment information. She had handled many passenger complaints in her career, but never anything involving someone this high-ranking in federal aviation authority. Across the gate area, Derek Thompson was pacing nervously while waiting for his supervisor. He kept looking at Maria and the security officers. He had no idea that his situation had just become much worse than he imagined. Derek's phone rang. It was his supervisor, Jim Peterson. Derek, I'm in the elevator coming up to your gate, Jim said. Tell me exactly what happened. Derek tried to explain the situation quickly. There was this woman with a Mexican passport trying to board the flight. She was being difficult when I asked for proper ID. Security is here now dealing with it. You called security on a passenger with a valid passport? Jim's voice sounded angry. Well, it seemed suspicious, Derek said weakly. Derek, we've talked about this before. You cannot question passengers about their choice of identification if their documents are valid. Derek felt his stomach drop. His supervisor was already angry, and he had not even arrived at the gate yet. 5 minutes later, Jim Peterson appeared at gate 23. He was a tall, thin man in his 50s, wearing a dark suit with an airline pin on his lapel. He had been a station manager for 12 years and had dealt with many employee problems, but his face showed that he was particularly upset about this situation. Jim walked directly to Sergeant Williams. "I'm Jim Peterson, the station manager. I understand there's been an incident involving one of my employees." "Yes, sir," Sergeant Williams replied. "Your gate agent engaged in racial profiling and discrimination against a passenger with valid identification." Jim looked over at Derek, who was standing behind the gate counter looking miserable. Then he looked at Maria, who was sitting calmly in a chair nearby. "Ma'am, I want to personally apologize for whatever happened here," Jim said to Maria. "This airline does not tolerate discrimination of any kind." "Thank you," Maria replied. "I hope you will take appropriate action to ensure this doesn't happen to other passengers." Jim nodded firmly. "We absolutely will. Can you tell me exactly what occurred?" Maria recounted the incident once again. She described Derek's hostile reaction to her Mexican passport, his inappropriate questions about her right to be in the country, and his refusal to accept her valid identification. As Maria spoke, Jim's face grew redder with anger. He kept glancing at Derek, who was trying to avoid eye contact. "This is completely unacceptable," Jim said when Maria finished. "Derek will face immediate disciplinary action for this behavior." Sergeant Williams cleared her throat. "Mr. Peterson, there's something else you need to know about this situation." "What's that?" Jim asked. Sergeant Williams looked at Maria, who nodded slightly. "This passenger is a federal employee," Sergeant Williams said. "She works for the FAA." Jim's face went from red to white in an instant. The FAA regulated his airline. They conducted safety inspections, issued fines for violations, and had the power to ground aircraft. Discriminating against any FAA employee was a nightmare scenario for any airline manager. "Which department of the FAA?" Jim asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. Sergeant Williams looked at her computer screen. "She's an inspector." Jim felt dizzy. An FAA inspector. Derek had discriminated against an FAA inspector. This was not just a human resources problem anymore. This could affect the airline's relationship with its federal regulator. "Ma'am," Jim said to Maria, his voice now very respectful, "I cannot express how sorry I am about this incident. This is not representative of our airline's values or policies." Maria studied Jim's face. She could see his genuine concern and embarrassment. Unlike Derek, Jim seemed to understand the seriousness of what had happened. "I appreciate your apology," Maria said, "but I'm concerned about whether this is an isolated incident or part of a pattern of discriminatory behavior." Jim nodded vigorously. "We will investigate that thoroughly. We will review Derek's employment record and look into any previous complaints." Derek was listening to this conversation with growing panic. He had never thought about his behavior as discrimination. He had just been suspicious of passengers who seemed different or foreign. But now he was realizing that his attitudes had been wrong and illegal. "Mr. Peterson," Derek said desperately, "I was just trying to be careful about security. I never meant to discriminate against anyone." Jim turned to Derek with cold anger. "You questioned a passenger's right to be in the country based on her appearance and her choice of legal identification. That is the definition of racial profiling." Sergeant Williams continued reading from her computer screen. She was being careful, not to reveal Maria's exact title, but even the information she was sharing was enough to terrify Jim Peterson. "The passenger works as an inspector in the Southwest region," Sergeant Williams said. "She conducts safety audits and compliance reviews." Jim closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The Southwest region included this airport. This passenger might have been here on official business. She might have been conducting an inspection of their operations. And Derek had discriminated against her. "Ma'am," Jim said to Maria, "may I ask if you were here on official business?" Maria smiled slightly. "I was returning from a business trip, yes." Jim did not ask for more details, but his imagination filled in the blanks. An FAA inspector returning from a business trip could mean she had been conducting surprise inspections somewhere in the region. If she filed a complaint about discrimination, it could trigger a full investigation of the airline's employment, practices, and customer service policies. The situation had just escalated from a simple human resources issue to a potential federal investigation that could cost the airline millions of dollars and damage its reputation permanently. Derek Thompson still did not understand the full scope of what he had done, but Jim Peterson was beginning to realize that this single act of discrimination could destroy careers and damage the entire airline. Jim Peterson pulled Derek Thompson aside for a private conversation. They walked about 10 feet away from the gate counter, but their voices carried in the quiet gate area. "Derek, you need to understand how serious this situation is," Jim said, in a low, tense voice. "You discriminated against a federal employee. This could result in lawsuits, federal investigations, and massive fines for the airline." Derek's face was sweating heavily now. "But I didn't know she worked for the government. She just looked suspicious with that Mexican passport." "That's exactly the problem," Jim hissed. "You made assumptions based on her race and her passport. That's illegal discrimination, and now we have an FAA employee as our victim." Derek still did not fully understand. "So she works for the FAA. What does that mean exactly?" Jim stared at Derek in disbelief. "The FAA regulates our airline, Derek. They control our operating licenses. They can shut us down if they find safety violations. They can fine us millions of dollars for regulatory problems." "Oh," Derek said weakly, finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of his mistake. "And you just treated one of their inspectors like a criminal because of her ethnicity," Jim continued. "Do you have any idea what this could do to our company?" While Jim and Derek were having their private conversation, Sergeant Williams was completing her investigation. She had gathered statements from multiple witnesses, reviewed the video evidence, and documented everything in her report. Sergeant Williams approached Maria again. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something confidentially." Maria stood up and walked with the sergeant to a quiet corner of the gate area. "I've been looking at your employment record," Sergeant Williams said quietly. "Your title shows that you're not just an inspector, you're a chief inspector. That means you're one of the highest-ranking safety officials in the region." Maria nodded. "That's correct." "Does Mr. Peterson know this?" Sergeant Williams asked. "Not yet," Maria replied. "I've been letting the situation develop naturally so I can see how it's handled." Sergeant Williams looked worried. "Ma'am, with respect, this situation is much bigger than what anyone realizes. If word gets out that a chief inspector was discriminated against at this airport, there could be serious consequences for everyone involved." Maria considered this. She had been planning to reveal her full title eventually, but she had wanted to observe the natural responses of the airline and airport staff first. "You're right," Maria said. "I think it's time for full disclosure." They walked back to where Jim Peterson was still lecturing Derek about the seriousness of discrimination. Jim looked up as they approached. "Mr. Peterson," Sergeant Williams said, "I need to update you on additional information about this incident." Jim's face showed dread. "What additional information?" Sergeant Williams looked at Maria, who nodded her permission. "Sir, this passenger is not just an FAA inspector," Sergeant Williams said slowly. "She is the chief inspector for the Southwest region." Jim Peterson's mouth fell open. Derek looked confused, not understanding what this meant. "Chief inspector?" Jim repeated weakly. "Yes," Maria said, speaking for herself now. "I am Maria Gonzalez, Chief Inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration's Southwest region. I oversee all safety inspections and regulatory compliance for airlines operating in this region." The color drained completely from Jim's face. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair. A chief inspector was one of the most powerful positions in aviation safety regulation. Chief inspectors had the authority to ground entire fleets of aircraft. They could shut down airline operations for safety violations. They reported directly to FAA headquarters in Washington. Derek was still confused. "What does that mean?" Jim looked at Derek with pure horror. It means you just discriminated against one of the most powerful people in aviation safety. It means she has the authority to shut down our entire operation if she finds safety problems. Derek's knees went weak. He grabbed onto the gate counter for support. "Ma'am," Jim said to Maria, his voice shaking, "I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am about this incident. This is the worst possible situation for our airline." Maria studied Jim's reaction carefully. She could see that he was genuinely horrified by what had happened. His concern seemed focused on both the discrimination itself and the potential consequences for the airline. "Mr. Peterson," Maria said calmly, "my position with the FAA is not relevant to how I should be treated as a passenger. Every traveler deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their job or status." Jim nodded rapidly. "You're absolutely right. Every passenger should be treated well. But the fact that you're a chief inspector makes the situation especially serious for us." Derek was now understanding the full scope of his mistake. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I had no idea who you were. I was just having a bad day and I made a terrible mistake." Maria looked at Derek with no sympathy. "Mr. Thompson, you didn't discriminate against me because you didn't know my job title. You discriminated against me because of my race and my choice to use a Mexican passport. That behavior is wrong regardless of who the victim is." "You're right," Derek said quietly. "I was wrong. I was being racist, and I'm sorry." It was the first time Derek had actually admitted that his behavior was racially motivated. But his apology came too late and sounded too much like damage control. Jim Peterson was already thinking about the consequences this incident would have for the airline. A discrimination complaint from an FAA chief inspector could trigger federal investigations that would cost millions of dollars and take years to resolve. "Ma'am," Jim said, "what can we do to make this right? How can we address this situation appropriately?" Maria had been thinking about this question throughout the entire incident. As an FAA official, she dealt with safety problems and regulatory violations every day. She knew that real change required more than just apologies and individual punishments. "Mr. Peterson, this incident reveals systemic problems that go beyond one employee's bad behavior," Maria said. "I want to know what training your gate agents receive about non-discrimination policies. I want to know how passenger complaints are handled. I want to know what oversight exists to prevent this kind of behavior." Jim realized that Maria was not just talking about Derek's punishment. She was talking about a comprehensive review of the airline's policies and procedures. As an FAA chief inspector, she had the authority to demand this kind of review. "We will provide you with all of that information," Jim promised. "We will also implement whatever changes you recommend to prevent future incidents." Derek was watching this conversation with growing despair. He was beginning to understand that his discrimination had not just cost him his job, it had created a major crisis for his entire company. Sergeant Williams was also listening carefully to the conversation. She knew that this incident would become a case study in how discrimination complaints should be handled. Airport security would need to review their own procedures to make sure they responded appropriately to similar situations in the future. Maria looked around the gate area. Flight 447 had been delayed for over an hour because of Derek's discriminatory behavior. The other passengers were still waiting patiently, but they had all witnessed the entire incident. "Mr. Peterson," Maria said, "I think it's time to address the other passengers who have been affected by this situation." Jim Peterson looked around the gate area at the dozens of passengers who had been waiting for over an hour. Many of them were checking their phones for alternative flights. Others were watching the ongoing investigation with interest. "You're absolutely right," Jim said to Maria. "These passengers deserve an explanation and an apology." Jim walked to the gate counter and picked up the microphone. His hands were shaking slightly as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Jim Peterson, the station manager for this location. I want to personally apologize for the significant delay to Flight 447. This delay was caused by inappropriate behavior by one of our employees, not by any weather or mechanical issues." The passengers looked up from their phones and magazines. They had been wondering what was taking so long to resolve the situation. "One of our gate agents engaged in discriminatory behavior toward a passenger," Jim continued. This behavior was completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of our airline. We are taking immediate action to address this situation. Derek stood behind the counter, his face burning with shame as his manager publicly announced his misconduct. He knew that his career in aviation was over. The employee responsible for this incident has been immediately suspended pending a full investigation, Jim announced. We will also be reviewing our training procedures and policies to ensure this type of incident never happens again. Several passengers applauded Jim's announcement. The elderly woman who had defended Maria spoke up loudly. That young lady was treated terribly, she called out. She was polite and patient while your employee was rude and discriminatory. I'm glad you're taking action. Other passengers nodded in agreement. The businessman who had recorded the incident raised his hand. I have video of the entire confrontation, he said. I'd be happy to share it with your investigation team. Jim nodded gratefully. Thank you, sir. We appreciate any evidence that helps us understand exactly what happened. Sergeant Williams stepped forward to address the passengers as well. As airport security, we want to assure everyone that discrimination and racial profiling are not tolerated at this facility. We take all complaints seriously and investigate them thoroughly. Maria watched this public discussion with professional interest. She was seeing how the airline and airport security handled a discrimination incident when they knew they were being observed by many witnesses. Derek was ordered to leave the gate area immediately. A replacement gate agent was called to take over Flight 447. Derek gathered his personal belongings from behind the counter, avoiding eye contact with everyone around him. As Derek walked away from the gate, several passengers made comments loud enough for him to hear. Good riddance, said one man. I hope he learns from this, said another woman. Derek hurried toward the elevator, carrying his shame and the knowledge that he had destroyed his own career through his prejudiced behavior. Jim Peterson approached Maria privately after the public announcements were finished. Ma'am, I want you to know that Derek's employment with our airline is terminated effective immediately. He will not be allowed to work in any customer service capacity for our company. I appreciate that, Maria said, but I'm more concerned about preventing future incidents than punishing individual employees. Jim nodded. What would you recommend? Maria had been thinking about this question throughout the incident. As an FAA chief inspector, she often had to develop corrective action plans for safety violations. Discrimination problems required similar systematic approaches. First, all customer service employees need comprehensive training on anti-discrimination policies, Maria said. They need to understand what constitutes racial profiling and why it's illegal. Jim was taking notes on his phone. Absolutely. What else? Second, you need clear procedures for handling passenger complaints about discrimination. Employees should know who to contact and how to investigate these issues properly. We'll implement that immediately, Jim promised. Third, Maria continued, you need regular auditing of customer service interactions to identify potential problems before they become major incidents. Jim was writing down everything Maria suggested. He knew that implementing these changes would cost money and require significant effort, but he also knew that another incident like this could be much more expensive for the airline. Ma'am, would you be willing to work with us on developing these procedures? Jim asked. Your expertise would be invaluable. Maria considered this request. It was unusual for an FAA official to work directly with an airline on non-safety issues. But discrimination in aviation was something she cared about personally and professionally. I would be willing to provide guidance, Maria said, but this would need to be done through proper channels with FAA approval. Of course, Jim said quickly. We would follow all appropriate procedures. Sergeant Williams finished her investigation and approached Maria with a clipboard full of paperwork. Ma'am, I have the incident report ready for your review, she said. This will be forwarded to federal authorities and to the airline's corporate headquarters. Maria read through the report carefully. It was thorough and accurate, documenting all of Derek's discriminatory statements and actions. The report also included witness statements and the video evidence. This looks complete, Maria said. Thank you for handling this professionally. "Thank you for your patience with our process," Sergeant Williams replied. "I know this was a difficult experience for you." An hour and a half after the original incident began, Flight 447 was finally ready to board with a new gate agent. Jim Peterson personally handled Maria's boarding process. "Ma'am, we've upgraded you to first class as a gesture of goodwill," Jim said, "and we've provided a travel voucher for future flights." Maria accepted the upgrade but handed back the voucher. "Please donate the value of this voucher to a civil rights organization," she said. "That would be more meaningful than a personal benefit for me." Jim was impressed by Maria's response. Even after being discriminated against, she was thinking about how to create positive change rather than personal compensation. As Maria boarded the aircraft, many of the passengers who had witnessed the incident approached her to express their support. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," said the elderly woman. "You handled yourself with such dignity," said the businessman with the video. "I hope that gate agent learned his lesson," said the young mother with the baby. Maria thanked each person for their kindness and support. She was touched by how many strangers had stood up for her during the confrontation. The flight to Phoenix was quiet and uneventful. Maria used the time to write detailed notes about the incident for her own records. She also began drafting recommendations for how airports and airlines could better prevent and handle discrimination complaints. As the plane descended toward Phoenix, Maria reflected on the day's events. One man's prejudice had created a crisis that affected dozens of people and could have serious consequences for the airline. But the incident had also revealed the power of witnesses who were willing to speak up against discrimination. Maria knew that her story would not end when the plane landed. The incident report would trigger investigations and policy changes. Derek Thompson would face consequences for his behavior. And hopefully, other airline employees would learn from this situation and treat all passengers with respect. The plane touched down in Phoenix right on schedule, despite the long delay in Denver. Maria gathered her belongings and prepared to return to her normal life as an FAA chief inspector. But she knew that this incident would stay with her and influence her work for years to come. 3 weeks after the incident at Denver International Airport, Maria Gonzalez sat in her office in Phoenix reviewing a stack of reports. Her desk was covered with documents about aircraft inspections, safety violations, and regulatory compliance issues. But today, she was also reading updates about the discrimination case involving Derek Thompson. The airline had moved quickly to address the situation. Within days of the incident, Derek had been officially terminated from his position. The company's Human Resources Department had conducted a thorough review of his employment record and found 2 previous complaints about his treatment of passengers with foreign-sounding names. Maria was not surprised by this discovery. In her experience, discrimination was rarely an isolated incident. People who exhibited prejudiced behavior usually had a pattern of such conduct over time. Derek had been required to attend a 3-day diversity and inclusion training program before he could be eligible for employment with any other airline. The program was designed to help aviation workers understand the legal and ethical requirements for treating all passengers equally. Maria had received a copy of Derek's training certificate, along with a letter he had written as part of the program. In the letter, Derek acknowledged that his behavior had been discriminatory and harmful. He expressed regret for his actions and promised to do better in the future. The letter seemed sincere, but Maria knew that real change required more than just words. Derek would have to prove through his future actions that he had truly learned from this experience. The airline had also implemented the policy changes that Maria had recommended. All customer service employees were now required to complete annual anti-discrimination training. The company had established a clear procedure for handling discrimination complaints, with dedicated staff members trained to investigate such incidents. Most importantly, the airline had begun conducting regular audits of customer service interactions. Mystery shoppers with diverse backgrounds were sent to test how employees treated passengers of different races, ethnicities, and nationalities. Jim Peterson had personally overseen these changes. He had sent Maria regular updates about the airline's progress in implementing new policies. He had also invited her to speak at a company-wide training session about diversity and inclusion in aviation. Maria had accepted the invitation and traveled back to Denver for the training session. She spoke to over 200 airline employees about the importance of treating all passengers with respect and dignity. During her presentation, Maria shared her personal story about the discrimination incident. She explained how Derek's behavior had made her feel and why such treatment was harmful to both individual passengers and the aviation industry as a whole. The employees listened carefully to Maria's presentation. Many asked thoughtful questions about how to handle difficult situations without resorting to discriminatory behavior. Some shared their own experiences with discrimination and expressed commitment to creating a more inclusive workplace. After the training session, several employees approached Maria privately to thank her for speaking out about discrimination. A young Latina gate agent told Maria that her story had inspired her to be more confident about reporting discriminatory behavior when she witnessed it. An older African-American baggage handler said that Maria's presentation had helped him understand why it was important to speak up when he saw coworkers treating passengers badly based on their race or ethnicity. The incident had also led to changes at Denver International Airport itself. Sergeant Williams had worked with airport management to revise their procedures for handling discrimination complaints. Security officers now received additional training on recognizing and responding to bias-related incidents. The airport had also established a passenger advocate program. Travelers who felt they had been discriminated against could file complaints with trained advocates who would investigate the issues and work to resolve them fairly. Maria was pleased with these systemic changes, but she knew that the real test would come over time. Policies and training programs were only effective if they were consistently implemented and enforced. 6 months after the incident, Maria received a surprising phone call from Derek Thompson. He had found new employment as a customer service representative at a small regional airline in Montana. Derek called to thank Maria for not pursuing criminal charges against him and to update her on his progress since the incident. He had completed additional diversity training on his own time and had been working with a counselor to understand his own biases and prejudices. "I know I can't undo what I did," Derek said during the phone call, "but I want you to know that I've learned from my mistakes. I treat every passenger with respect now, regardless of what they look like or where they're from." Derek also told Maria that he had become an advocate for diversity training in his new workplace. He had shared his story with other employees as an example of how discrimination could destroy careers and hurt innocent people. Maria appreciated Derek's call, but she remained cautious about his claims of personal change. She knew that overcoming deeply held prejudices required ongoing effort and commitment, not just a few months of training. The most meaningful outcome of the incident came a year later, when Maria received a letter from a young Mexican-American woman named Sofia Rodriguez. Sofia was studying aviation management at Arizona State University and had heard about Maria's story through news reports. In her letter, Sofia wrote that Maria's example had inspired her to pursue a career in aviation safety. Sofia had been experiencing discrimination in her college program, with some professors and classmates questioning whether someone with her background belonged in the aviation industry. Reading about how Maria had handled discrimination with dignity and professionalism had given Sofia the courage to continue with her studies. Sofia was now planning to apply for an internship with the FAA after graduation. Maria was moved by Sofia's letter and immediately arranged to meet with her. During their meeting, Maria shared advice about building a career in aviation and overcoming the barriers that women and minorities often faced in the industry. Maria also connected Sofia with other successful Latino professionals in aviation, helping her build a network of mentors and supporters. 6 months later, Sofia was accepted into the FAA's prestigious internship program. As Maria reflected on the 2 years that had passed since the Denver incident, she realized that the discrimination she had experienced had created opportunities for positive change that extended far beyond the original situation. Derek Thompson had learned about the consequences of prejudice and was now working to prevent similar incidents in his new job. The airline had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination policies that protected all passengers. Denver International Airport had improved its procedures for handling bias complaints. Most importantly, Maria's story had inspired other people, like Sophia, to pursue careers in aviation despite the challenges they might face. It had also encouraged witnesses to speak up when they saw discrimination happening to others. Maria kept a copy of Sophia's letter in her desk drawer as a reminder that fighting against discrimination was not just about seeking justice for individual incidents. It was about creating a more inclusive and fair aviation industry for future generations. The incident that had started with one man's prejudice at a busy airport gate had ultimately led to positive changes that would benefit countless travelers and aviation workers for years to come. Maria knew that this was the true measure of success in fighting discrimination, not just addressing individual cases, but creating lasting change that prevented future incidents and opened doors for others. As she returned to her daily work of ensuring aviation safety, Maria carried with her the knowledge that standing up against discrimination was just as important as any other part of her job. Both responsibilities were about protecting people and making the aviation industry better for everyone who used it.